I know you all want to hear me talk some more. I'm almost done. So we finished the hot topics. We're going to move on to what we're affectionately calling other topics. Maybe lukewarm topics, right? Okay, sorry. So we're going to start with landscaping and buffering, parking access and mobility, and the sign code. And again, this portion of the presentation is going to be much more brief because frankly we think people aren't as interested in this and the changes aren't as significant. Yeah. So as far as landscaping goes, this mostly, we updated the spacing of trees and we detailed the numbers of shrubs required. The way the code is written right now, tree spacing around the perimeter is 25 feet, which is a little bit more of an attempt to screen a property. We've increased that to 40 feet, which would allow more room for trees to grow and better visibility for businesses while maintaining that attractive appearance. We've specified the number of shrubs. Again, that's just a small change, but it was just a thing in the code that was pretty ambiguous the way it's written right now. And we've increased the minimum width for some of the planting areas required with the goal of having trees survive. Some of them are so small that the trees will just die over and over again, even if you replace them. So we're trying to make these have some longevity and improve the function and appearance of your landscaping areas. We've added a requirement in the code to have landscape islands throughout the interior of the lot. Right now, the code just has a general open space requirement. These landscape islands can count towards that requirement. But again, it just breaks up a large surface, a large asphalt or concrete area and makes it look a little bit nicer. And again, a little bit more predictability as to what you're going to get in the end. And we've clarified and standardized your buffering requirements. In some ways similar to your zoning districts, it was kind of scattered a little bit throughout the code with slightly different requirements in different places. So we've kind of just made 4 different types of buffers. We've specified that a wall or fence and landscaping is required. The code it kind of left it open-ended as to whether it would be both or either. And we've also made a table just to kind of make it really clear if you're building a property in this zoning district and you're abutting this zoning district, this is what the expectation is. So I am done talking and I'm going to kick it over to Wendy for the rest of this.
So I'm going to cover the rest of it because I think most of it is the things I wrote. So parking access and mobility, again, we did not do a complete overhaul of the regulations. But what we did do is try to provide some clarification. So with residential lots right now, you're currently prohibited from having parking areas in front. I mean, you can have a driveway, but you can't have turnarounds and this stuff. So we maintain that, although we did create some provisions for small turnaround areas. If you have frontage on, I think it's 8 different main streets that are very high traffic, and so instead of having to back out on those, you would be allowed to have a 9x9 turnaround area. We also put in some provisions to help specify if you've got a wider lot, you could do a circular driveway, but if you've got a very narrow lot, you would only be allowed to have access. So again, these are things that the city was doing or trying to do, and we just provided a little bit of clarity to it. Parking ratios, these are the number of parking spaces you are required to have for businesses and residential. The residential didn't change, but for commercial businesses, the ratios you have right now were very high, what we call the parking for Christmas, and they were required to have all those, and it created larger parking lots. In the beginning of the year, earlier in the year, the city staff had made some adjustments where they split the parking ratios, and they had what was in the downtown master plan study area and what was in the rest of the city. The ratios they had established for the master plan were actually closer to what the modern parking requirements are for most communities. And so we went through and very meticulously said, where are you over parking? Where are you requiring too much? And tried to adjust those. We've also provided some clarification on shared parking, off-site parking, and those type of activities. When stormwater is an issue, one of the things we looked at doing was allowing for pervious pavement, so the pavement that allows stormwater to go through it. We did allow for that in parking spaces, but you will have to provide a maintenance plan to make sure that the perviousness and the porousness of it will remain. And that will also be something that would probably be for commercial uses and industrial uses reviewed by MSD as part of their review. And then we incorporated some stronger requirements for sidewalks and trails. Now, this is largely related to subdivisions, and you're probably not going to see a large number of new subdivisions. But should that come to be, they would have to look to the pedestrian and bicycle plan to see if there's extra right-of-way dedication for trails or sidewalks. We also put in some requirements that, if you are adjacent to an existing sidewalk and you don't have one, that you would have to help kind of extend that connectivity. The sign code, part of the reason, this is not in the zoning or subdivision regulations, but we did update it. And part of that was based on actually a Supreme Court case from 2015. And I'm not going to go into the very long description I gave to the committee about what we had to do. But the Supreme Court in the United States basically took away a lot of any community's ability to regulate signs based on what they say. So we call them content neutral. They want us to be content neutral. What that means is we can't have special regulations for a real estate sign that is different than a construction sign, because how would you know it's a real estate sign? You have to read it, right? And the Supreme Court said that's not good. You need to be focusing on it's a temporary sign in your yard, or it's a banner sign or a ground sign. So we went and we kind of looked at where there was content regulation and stripped that out of there and tried to basically, we really did keep the sign area and sign heights that you have now in place. So there's not been a significant change in how much signage you can have. And we don't expect you to see any change, but how it's regulated is very different. The one thing that we did keep in was one distinction that is based on content, and that's because the Supreme Court case didn't specifically speak to previous Supreme Court cases. And so we kept a description that says there's a difference between a sign that has a commercial message, it's grand opening, real estate, construction, versus those that have no commercial speech, your political signs, your opinion signs, religious signs, those type of things. And what we've done is, in line with previous court cases, said we're going to be pretty hands-off. We're going to tell you how big they can be on individual lots. They can't be in the right-of-way, but we're not going to get into trying to regulate those anymore. Or they are regulated, I apologize, but they are a little bit more hands-off than the commercial signage. So that is the one, because we wanted to make sure everybody can have their political signs and do all that. That was not the intent of this. So that is the one content-based regulation we have. Again, a lot of this was clarification and bringing the sign code into compliance with federal law. The one major addition we did provide was a master sign plan option. And what this does is for very large developments that are 25 acres in size or have 300,000 square feet of floor area. So we're talking the community college, massive institution, schools and the like. They can come in with essentially a plan development package for their signs and say, we are going to do, here's all of our signs, here's what they're going to look like, here's how they're going to be uniform and creative, and try to deal with this large campus-like setting. And if you do that, it would have to go through the ARB for review, and they will essentially approve the entire plan package for the entire site. And in return for that, there is a little bit of flexibility. Your maximum amount of signage can go up a little bit, and then you can have some alternative in heights. So if you want to do something that's a little bit more creative, you could do that. And this will help, again, with like wayfinding and some of those things on these larger sites. So that is one of the big new things in the sign code. Now we get to like the miscellaneous, and this is probably the third tier of hot topics. These are the ones where we've just done some clarification and there really isn't substantial changes. So we start with the review procedures, and these are all of the development, when you hear public hearings and public meetings, how are things reviewed in the city of Kirkwood? And so what we did is we took all these procedures from all over the place and put them in one chapter. And then we clarified that where we have permitted uses, meaning they don't require a special use permit, they would be reviewed as a site plan as part of like a building permit application. So they would come in through staff level review. And those are only going to be the ones that meet all of the standards. So they meet all the lot area, they meet all the setbacks. They still will require architectural review, however it might be applicable. So if it's single family residential, which would not require site plan anyways, but if it was single family, they would have advisory ARB review, as Ann pointed out earlier. Any non-residential use would go through the ARB for their architectural review separately. A minor subdivision is essentially where somebody wants to maybe lot split, do one lot split. It would have to be in compliance with the lot requirements, so they can't make one large lot into two non-conforming lots. But if you had a large enough lot and you wanted to split it into two, you can do that. If you want to adjust boundaries between two lots, you could do it, and that's just going to be an administrative level subdivision. Anything bigger or anything that's going to require any type of public improvement, like infrastructure, has to go through the traditional major subdivision, which is going to go through planning and zoning and city council. And then the one thing we did, which is actually this, it's not a formal procedure, but you have a little bit version of this in your current code. We just formalized it, is this alternative equivalency review. And what this does is give people an option for things where they're trying to meet or exceed certain standards. And the certain standards are landscaping and architecture, lighting and parking. And what this does is it's where you're actually improving on what the requirements are instead of a variance where people ask to reduce things. And the examples we gave of what people could do with this is if we require buffering between the street and parking, which would typically be vegetation, somebody could come in and say, I've got this creative public art that we'd like to do. It has the same effect. It requires board level review. So they have to go to whatever board is subject. It would not be staff approval. But it gives people an option for things that we did not envision in the zoning code, but or it would actually be a better solution to come in and request a special review for that. So those are kind of the big picture changes to the review procedures. The least sexiest standards in the zoning and subdivision are the subdivision design standards. These are things like right-of-way widths, when you have new subdivisions, how public infrastructure is put in. We did not make any major changes to these. We really just tried to clean them up and get them organized, and then make sure that we were addressing the sidewalk connections. But for the most part, they remained intact. I believe in the future they might be looking at developing a street design manual, but for the most part, we just kept the things as they are now. You currently have a provision for community unit plans, which we maintain without a lot of change. Right now, you have two options. One would allow for senior housing, and the other would be for lots that have very unique and difficult development challenges, such as topography being the major one. You don't have a lot of sites for those, and that one has not been used a lot. The senior housing one was actually encompassed within the R6 planned residential district, so that type of community unit plan has been removed. So for what we've done is just basically kept the one procedure for sites that have very difficult terrain or flooding issues. Again, requiring Planning and Zoning Commission review and approval by City Council. The Board of Adjustment, that we kept that board. We did not get rid of them. And we did not have any major changes in their role. They're going to be doing the same thing they do now. The only thing we did is the current information about the number of board members and how they are appointed and all that kind of establishment of the BOA is in the zoning code. Unlike every other board and commission in the city. So the Planning and Zoning Commission and the ARB are all in Chapter 2 of the Municipal Code. And so we have proposed that, to be consistent, the Board of Adjustment information be moved to Chapter 2 so that all boards are addressed in that same chapter. Telecommunications, these are cell towers. We did not make changes to this other than to bring this section into compliance with state law, which largely controls what the city can and can't do. And so just a few changes were made to that to address state requirements. General provisions, this is the very first article of the zoning code, and it contains pretty much the boilerplate language that is in every municipal code across this U.S. There are the purpose of this code, the applicability. The one thing we did do was incorporate what we call transitional regulations, which are how do we deal with applications that are in process when this new code becomes effective. And really what happens is if somebody's got an application in that's in the review process and this one becomes effective, it continues under the process by which it was submitted, so whatever's in this current code. They can have the option, if they want to go through a review of the new one, to go and essentially reapply under this new code. After the effective date of this new code, anything that comes in after that would go through the new code process. So we just want to address that kind of transition. Nonconformities, this is essentially the grandfathering clauses of your regulations. And these, again, have not no major changes. The one thing we did do was just make it very clear the differences between a nonconforming use, which is a use that is not allowed in the zoning district, but was established legally prior to whatever code was in place. And so sometimes you'll see, a gas station in a residential district or something unusual, commercial use in a residential district. It has been there forever. It was grandfathered and can continue along. They have much more restrictive standards in how they can be, how long they can stay in place. If they go vacant, what happens? Versus a non-conforming structure, which is the use is allowed. A residential home that has an encroachment into a setback that they're required to do would be a non-conforming structure because the home would be permitted. And so we address what happens under that situation. Enforcement and penalties, this is the violation clause. These are, I think, this is exactly word for word the same regulations you have now. And that's largely, again, because it's set out in state law what the violation and penalties can be.